Support for the Health Channel podcast comes from Florida Cancer Specialists. Florida Cancer Specialists urges everyone not to postpone recommended screenings such as mammograms, colonoscopies, or biopsies. Regular screenings save lives. More at flcancer.com/getscreened.
Every year, we honor the men and women who died while serving in the U.S. military. While many lost their lives in combat, others died from battle wounds you can't always see, suicide, and the mental health struggles caused by post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. But there is hope for the many veterans who are living with PTSD. We're here to shed some light on the resources and recovery options available that can help save lives.
This program is made possible by Lois Pope. We salute her generous philanthropy and unwavering support of our veterans.
Welcome, everyone, to Healing America's Heroes. I'm Olga Villaverde. Thank you so much for joining us today. So how many veterans are experiencing PTSD? According to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs National Center for PTSD, during Operation Iraqi Freedom from 2003 to 2011 and Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2014, between 11 and 20% who served have PTSD in a given year. Desert Storm in 1991 was shorter in comparison, 42 days long, and yet 12 out of every 100 Gulf War veterans have PTSD. And it's estimated that about 30 out of every 100 Vietnam veterans have had PTSD in their lifetime. There is no question at all that more needs to be done to help veterans, and our panel of experts agree. I'd like to introduce each and every one of them. We start first with Sharisa Jackson. She served 23 years of active military duty service. She spent many years as a nurse treating the injured. She retired from the military and now serves as Chief Medical Executive for AMVETS, an organization working to help veterans nationwide. Dr. Sonia Norman is the director of the National PTSD Consultation Program, a service of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and a professor of psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego. Dr. Robert Pietrzak is the director of the Psychiatric Epidemiology Lab at the Department of Veteran Affairs National Center for PTSD. He is also a professor of psychiatry at the Yale University School of Medicine. And Montel Williams, a tireless advocate for veterans and a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He's a Navy and Marine Corps veteran serving in the military for 22 years. Montel is also a TV host and an MS warrior. I welcome all of you, and I thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get started first with just the term PTSD. We hear it a lot. What exactly is it, and does it ever go away? Dr. Norman, let me start with you.
Sure. So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. It can happen to some people after they experience a life-threatening traumatic event. So certainly combat and wartime experiences count for that. Lots of civilian experiences can be traumatic too, car accidents, assaults. Most people have a hard time right after something like that happens and recover over time. But some people go on to develop PTSD where they continue to have symptoms where they can't stop thinking about it. They might have nightmares, but at the same time, they're putting a lot of energy into trying not to think about it, not to remember, not to do things that remind them of it, which can be very exhausting and really limit someone's life. And they also might find that the way they see the world has changed. It might feel more dangerous. They might not feel as confident in the world. People startle more easily. They have more concentration and sleep problems. So those are some of the symptoms. In terms of your question about does it stay with you forever? No, it's not a life sentence. We do have really effective treatments.
Dr. Pietrzak, your thoughts?
Sure. The other thing I would add, in addition to what Dr. Norman mentioned, is that there's an emerging emphasis on conceptualizing post-traumatic stress symptomatology really on a dimensional continuum, which has turned out to be quite useful for us. And with this conceptualization, it really encompasses the full spectrum of no symptoms to mild to moderate and severe symptoms. And this has been quite useful for both clinical and research purposes, as post-traumatic stress symptoms may be a precursor or risk factor for developing PTSD. My research group recently found that veterans with what's called sub-threshold PTSD symptoms, so below the threshold that's required for diagnosis of PTSD, were more than 6 times more likely than those without such symptoms to develop PTSD over a 7-year follow-up. And the idea here is that post-traumatic stress in general, not necessarily where it's so severe that it's a disorder, may actually sensitize an individual to subsequent stressors and trauma, thus increasing the likelihood of their developing PTSD. So what this suggests to us is that the assessment and monitoring of the full spectrum of post-traumatic stress symptoms is quite useful, may have potential prognostic utility, and that interventions to reduce these symptoms may help mitigate risk of developing the full syndrome called PTSD.
Thank you, Doctor. Sharisa, you are known as America's Combat Nurse. I love that title. If you could explain it to us. I know you provided medical care for soldiers with injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan. And first of all, thank you for your service. Would you mind if we ask you how that experience impacted your life and how PTSD impacted you directly?
Absolutely. My first deployment was in 2005 to Iraq, and then I had a follow-up deployment back to Iraq in 2006. And then I went to Afghanistan in 2011. And all during this time from 2005 until 2012, I had totally compartmentalized my PTSD. I had been treating soldiers at Walter Reed and other facilities with PTSD, so I knew what it looked like. And so when it was time for me to discover that I also was suffering with the challenges of PTSD, I realized that I was a good compartmentalizer. And that's what the therapist has said to me. And so for me, it was important that I realize what my triggers were and determine what is a good treatment option for me. For me, it's all about the triggers. So for some people, it may be, I know what to do. I know how to sleep. I know how to combat my anxiety and depression. But me, it's about those triggers. The things that I saw in Iraq and Afghanistan were horrific. And as a result, I came back with PTSD. And I'll never forget those things. But I was on a mission when I came back to make sure I changed the stigma of PTSD. And as a result, I coined the slogan, I'm Sharisa Jackson, America's Combat Nurse. Because I saw what I saw, and I continue to advocate for veterans.
Montel, you're also a veteran, and thank you for your service as well. You have been on the front lines. Could you talk a little bit about your experience, how you overcame, and why it's so important to focus on the mental health of our veterans? I know you're extremely passionate about that.
Well, I think one of the things we have to start with is that unfortunately how quickly we forget. Right now, lots of people continue to spit out that lip service statement of thank you for your service, not meaning you, but others say so, and it's just lip service. It's just like the saying that people say sometimes in the morning, how you doing? And they really don't care about the answer. Thank you for your service was fine and dandy when I think we were in the middle of combat woes and people were so thankful that their children didn't have to be the ones who were being sent overseas. Right now, we need more than lip service. We need to understand that we have soldiers, veterans, who protected and defended this democracy against all enemies they could, 100%, in protection of us. And I don't want this to be something that we quickly forget, especially knowing right now what's about to happen in this country. To think about what we're going to start doing for the next pandemic. And what I mean by that is that we're sitting here right now where we have probably somewhere estimated, depending on which science, which doctor, which poll you listen to, but we've just been through one of the scariest times in American history with this COVID pandemic. There are people who have spent time in hospitals who have recovered, and though they've recovered and some of them think that it's over, we think, well, we're starting to see that somewhere around 30% of those who were hospitalized for COVID are suffering from PTSD from that experience itself, along with our first responders, doctors, nurses, and other people who have been helping. So we need to learn right now how we better serve those veterans. And, the numbers have changed from 2018. We were, I think, it shifted down a little bit to somewhere between 17 and 20 veterans a day take their lives. But we don't know what's going to happen after this pandemic and scourge of isolation goes away and we start to get back to what we think is normal. Normal in America is going to be a society where about 30% of its population is walking sufferers of some form of PTSD. So I'm so excited about, talking about what we can do for the least of us, our veterans, and translate that into what we can do for all of us, the society.
And there's no doubt we need to do better. People tend to forget very quickly, as Sharisa was agreeing with us a few minutes before we got started as well. Dr. Peterzak, I wanted to turn to you now. One might imagine, and Montel talked about the pandemic, veterans feeling additionally stressed during COVID-19, but the new research says otherwise. And I'm fascinated by this. So what is the hidden side effect of COVID for veterans? Can you explain it?
Sure. I was just going to say that the scientific study of this process is relatively new, but the concept is not. There's a number of ancient religious, spiritual traditions, philosophers, and scholars who have long described the potentially transformative power of suffering. It's important to keep in mind, though, as Montel noted, that a person's capacity for post-traumatic growth will depend on their personal experiences, circumstances, and resources, and that this experience of growth is not a universal or given by any means. One of my favorite quotes that captures the essence of post-traumatic growth is from the late psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, who said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Our results further revealed that greater post-traumatic growth, particularly greater pandemic-related increases in the appreciation of life and improvements in social relationships, was associated with a 40% lower likelihood of contemplating suicide during the pandemic. So this finding suggests that interventions to promote post-traumatic growth may potentially be helpful in mitigating suicide risk, though we need more research. And we should also keep in mind that suicide prevention efforts should extend beyond mental health and look at the bigger picture of how the pandemic has affected veterans' functioning more generally, including housing, employment, finances, and relationships, and ensure that their needs are met in all of these domains.
Sharisa and Montel, I actually want to bring in your personal experiences because people use their own ways to deal with these situations. So, Sharisa, let me start with you. You talked about your personal experience with PTSD. What did you do? How would you, I guess, go on with life day in and day out?
I had to figure out what worked for me because, again, I used to take care of the soldiers and I knew the common medications that we would give the soldiers. And even when I went to therapy, those medications were offered to me. But I didn't want to not be myself with those medications. So I had to be on this journey of finding what worked for me. So I knew, going back to my spirituality, it always would bring me out of those dark times of divorce, dark times of being deployed multiple times and being a single mom and going through financial ruins. So I went back to what I knew, which is meditating, and I would meditate daily. And not only that, I'm a big athlete. So I started training for a half marathon. And when I would sweat, it felt like I was sweating those memories, sweating those tears, all my anxiety and fears away. But in essence, it was a way for me to purge and be able to just cry because I didn't have someone that I could talk to. I couldn't talk to my family. I couldn't talk to my friends. I couldn't go to my commanding officer. So I was in just isolation, trying to deal and cope with my own problems. So my spirituality and meditating, working out, and then finally just going through therapy and accepting that I needed a little additional help with some of my challenges and being brave enough to do that. And for me, that's worked. And it continued to work for me. And then I kind of journaled all of that in a book that I wrote called At Peace, Not in Pieces, to allow other folks to know that just because I'm a veteran doesn't mean I can't relate to anyone else dealing with trauma. So it's a way to just journal what you're going through, figure out a component that works, and just continue to execute and see, the change in your life and give you hope and inspiration, which is what I'm here to do to any veteran that's suffering, is to encourage, motivate, and inspire.
I think Teresa just nailed it. I mean, honestly, the first step is admitting that you have a problem and understanding that there is help out there. And though the organizations that are, chartered with helping may not have all of the answers, there are other organizations that exist in this country that do have some of the answers. And I found that for me, though I'm not in Sharisa's generation, my stresses really focused harder once I was out of the service and then literally dealing with life, dealing with the diagnosis of a chronic deadly illness, dealing with, I went back to Afghanistan to visit troops and during that period of time that I was there, some of the rockets red glare on the other side of the fence literally reminded me of things that brought back a few moments of PTSD for me that I really understood that I needed to ask for help for. And when I did ask for help, I got it. And I reached out and utilized the services that are out there and available. It requires a little digging, a little effort on my part. But I think that effort on my part is an effort that anybody who is suffering can go through if they decide that, yes, I have a problem and yes, I need help, and then reach out to get it.
Dr. Norman, I want to talk about some warning signs that people should look out for. And if they see them, how do they handle it? What should they do?
Yeah, everyone has transient times where they don't, where they struggle, where they don't feel their best, and that's just life. But if that's kind of continuous, where someone is down, anxious, can't get the trauma out of their minds, where it's really impacting their ability to live the life they want to live. And what we see a lot in treatment is when people come to us, it's because they just got a DUI or because their spouse is saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm out if you don't get help. Or they're stuck in school, in their career. They can't progress. They're having problems. So we call those functional problems. And generally, those are the things that bring people into treatment. It's not that they're like, I have these symptoms, but they're like, my life is messed up. This is not how I want to live, and I feel awful. And so any of those can be warning signs. And those things tend to be a little bit more chronic. And what we know with PTSD is people can recover after a while, but the chances of recovering and recovering more quickly are so much better with treatment. So it can be hard. It can be hard to say, okay, I need help, just like Montel said, but that really can't be the turning point.
Around the patients, I think absolutely people need the space to see how they manage their post-traumatic stress on their own, using their own resources. And in some cases, the tendency may be to be more closed up and more hesitant but I think it's important for loved ones to provide a context that is supportive and that sends the message that if the individual wants to talk, that supportive other is there. So absolutely, I agree that the patients and the space are absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think for me, I had to exercise patience for myself, right? Because I wanted to come back whole and be that Sharice I was prior to my 2005 deployment. And so I had to give myself permission to be patient through the process of learning who I am again. And not only that, I had to coach my family into being patient with me as well, because they wanted me to be that old Sharisa. And they didn't quite understand PTSD, nor how to deal with the new Sharisa. So all of us had to deal with the patients and having to understand and figure out, what's our new path and what's the new relationship is going to look like. And oftentimes I have family members who have, veteran husbands and wives who are dealing with PTSD and they don't have patience. And I'm always saying to them, you have to have patience so that you all can come together and unite and be there to support the veteran. So I really believe patience is key. You will not see a veteran come back like they was before. And in order to have them live their best life, family members, spouses, children, work, everyone has to be patient along that way.
It's really interesting, Olga. Right now, I think what's going on with our veterans, and we're finally starting to reach a point where we can understand at least, the varied verticals in which they need to get help. And I think Sharisa nailed it when she says we need to have patience. But we as a society are going to have to learn that same patience for all of us in the society.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're coming out of one pandemic and getting ready to walk right into another one, and that a nation's not facing the truth. That, coming out of COVID, we think that, we took our mask off this week, so everything's going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. And guess what? It's okay that it's not fine as long as we are working towards solution. But right now, while we live in a society that is so divided on every single level, so many of us have forgotten to reach out to that friend that we know might be suffering and say, hey, how you doing today? And then really stop to listen to the answer. And when they say, oh, no, everything's fine. No, come on, don't just give me the pat answer. Tell me, how you doing? What have you been doing lately? You're still, I'm staying at home, haven't gone out. Well, let's talk and dig into that. Why haven't you gone out? Why don't we get together? Now that we can get together, now that the masks are off, why don't we get together and go grab a cup of coffee just to chat? And then really, truly ask that question. how are you doing, and expect to listen to the answer. That's part of, I think, one of the biggest issues that faces us as a nation. We are so, self-centered and so unwilling to take the time to share with others who we are, share with others the fact that we aren't perfect. That'll give another person the opportunity to open the door to say, you know what, I'm not perfect either. I can use some help. That help is there. There is help out here. Now let's figure out the fact that you need to step up to the plate and say, you know what, maybe you're right. Maybe I can get some.
And it's true what you say. And loved ones come back sometimes seriously injured. And even that in itself takes a toll on the whole family, the caregivers. We forget about the caregivers who are also taking everything in their lives to make their loved ones better. Sharisa, I know PTSD education is very important to you, especially when it comes to suicide prevention. You run the HEAL program at AMVETS. Talk about this program and how it helps. And also, I'm just curious, what advice do you have for veterans who maybe are just afraid to ask for help?
Yeah, I'll start with that one first, because that one is near and dear to my heart, because no one gave me permission to just talk about my symptoms and to talk about PTSD. So it's okay to not be okay. I give you permission today to know that you don't have to be strong. PTSD is not a sign of weakness. And so for me, it's important that working at AMVETS as their chief medical executive, they brought me on to run their HEAL program. HEAL stands for Healthcare Evaluation, Advocacy, and Legislation. So anywhere in those pillars, I'm able to assist a veteran. And let me tell you, Olga, when these veterans come to us, to the HEAL program, they're desperate. They have looked for every imaginable resource out there to help them. And they come to AMVETS. So I have a charge on my life to really find these resources for them, because I can hear the hopelessness in their voices. And so the HEAL program allows us to find those resources for them. And that could be helping them find a job, help them with finances, help them with getting mental health resources at the VA or any other resources at the VA. But more importantly, one of the pillars is all about helping to decrease veteran suicide. And AMVETS was the only organization that's created an online suicide prevention training, because we wanted to make sure we tool everybody with a resource to help them be able to talk about suicide, to just say the word and be okay embracing what suicide is, so they're prepared when a family member or a friend is thinking about suicide. So I'm very proud of that program, and anyone that's watching can go to our HEAL page, AMVETSHEALprogram.com, to sign up for that training. It's for everybody. I have scenarios for veterans, for caregivers, for police officers, first responders. And so that's one of the key components of the program, is to help save the lives of veterans.
Dr. Norman, I want to talk about treatments if we can for just a little bit. What can be done medically to treat PTSD today? What is protocol, and are there new treatments in the horizon?
There are. I'm so glad you asked that, because there really are great treatments and more treatments on the horizon. But we do have therapies and medications that have been studied for many years. And one of the interesting things with PTSD is it appears the psychotherapies actually are the most effective treatments. And this just doesn't mean just walking into anyone's office and talking about anything. These are specific therapy protocols that are manualized, that have been studied. They're generally about 8 to 12 sessions. So that means 8 to 12 weeks, or sometimes they're even done daily or over 8 to 10 days. Now we see they're still effective, and the specific protocols that have the most evidence behind them are prolonged exposure therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR is how a lot of people know it. What these have in common is that they're trauma-focused therapies, meaning that people process the pain of their trauma, the memories. A lot of times when someone goes through such an emotional and difficult event, the instinct is to push it away, just keep going, not deal with it. But we know that that pain is still in there, whether it's fear or loss or grief or guilt. And so these therapies help the person kind of experience that and move past it.
What we see in our veteran community, think about this. When our veterans are being looked at as being weak, can you imagine what our general society is feeling right now for those who are suffering from the traumatic scars of their hospitalization over the course of the last year, the 2 to 3 months where they couldn't breathe? Are they going to step up to the plate and now say to another family member after they survived COVID that, well, you know, I think I'm suffering from PTSD, when they think, well, it wasn't a war, that I shouldn't even say anything about it? We've really got to end this stigma. We've got to end this idea that mental illness is weakness, or the fact that you need help makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you a human being. And the quicker we come to that resolution and we learn from what we're learning from our veteran community, the faster we as a society are going to heal.
Absolutely. I want to thank all of you for your time, all the information, and everything you do. Montel, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Dr. Robert Pietrzak, Dr. Sonia Norman, Sharisa Jackson, thank you so much. I also want to, before we wrap, share some resources that if you have a pen handy or a pencil, please write them down. It's for you if you need help. Like Sharisa said, it's okay not to be okay. So a few of them here is for information about PTSD and PTSD treatment, visit ptsd.va.gov. If you're in a crisis, contact the Veterans Crisis Line, veteranscrisisline.net, or you can call 1-800-273-8255, press the number 1, or send a text to 838-255. The HEAL program that Sharisa was talking about, give them a call, 833-VET-HEAL, 838-4325, or go to the website, amvetshealprogram.org. Again, to my panel, thank you so much for joining me. I do appreciate it more than you know, and I do appreciate everyone's services. It comes from the bottom of my heart. I'm Olga Villaverde. We thank you so much for your time. Let's do the change, like Montel said, and let's help these veterans every single day.
This program is made possible by Lois Pope. We salute her generous philanthropy and unwavering support of our veterans.